Thank you, Torlien. You will be joining us for a further discussion, and I would like to ask Rainer Bakke to enter the scene again. And please welcome Mr. Jürgen Troppe, Executive Vice President for Market Operations and IT in Statkraft. Please take your seats. Now, we haven't heard from you yet, Troppe, so I will start with you. Earlier today, we heard Michael Liebreich describe the age of plenty, where profits move from generation to consumer interaction. And where in this future do you see a profitable business model for a power generator like Statkraft?
Very much agree with Michael, actually. We also see a change towards customers, and we have actually a background, of course, of being part of a very classical system where it goes top-down. Somebody is producing power in central stations and delivering to the end consumers. And this kind of classical system has been with a lot of customers as well. We have been in direct contact with big industrial customers in the first place, and we had always had a strong focus. You mentioned aluminum earlier, and a lot of other materials that have been produced here in Norway and elsewhere, and that was and still is a very important pillar for the future. But the system is, of course, changing, and we are part of this. So we try to develop satellites at the moment. We are investing in solar customer solutions in India. We are developing projects in Brazil towards wind and solar. We are experimenting with storage in Europe, and we are, of course, investing also large scale in wind in different parts, including Norway and the UK. The customer is always at the center of attention, and this is not about a technology game. This is also very much about customers who have an idea about what they want to do. They form their own opinion, and they make choices which are not necessarily driven by what is the most logical in the system, but also by consumer preferences. And it is a key interest of us to be close to the customers also going forward, but not only to private household customers, of course, but also very much towards the large industrials, because they are a major part of economy.
So today we heard both Torlien and Rainer Bakke saying that, I suppose you're especially pleased to hear Rainer Bakke telling us that the price signals will have to go through to the investors. And there will still be incentives for energy storage and for renewable production, but you will try not to disturb the price signal. Is that good news for you, Troppe?
Absolutely. We need to have markets find the best possible solution for the mix of technologies and mix of applications and mix of products that will in the end deliver. So in that sense it's good news. It's of course not good news to see that at the same time we see a lot of regulatory intervention, and there is push for a certain energy mix on a national level, which is very understandable. At the same time it doesn't really comply with the European markets. So that's a concern we have. Combined heat and power being pushed into certain markets and so on and so on. These are worrying elements, but at the same time we very much appreciate the acknowledgement of markets doing the best job in finding the right solution.
Now, where is the perfect balance between? I think we all agree that markets are good because they get costs down, they get resources allocated where there should be. On the other hand, markets, especially the European emission market, have not delivered what we want. They haven't delivered the transformation of the energy system that we want. I would like you, Rainer, to where is that balance? Where do we find that balance? And Tord afterwards.
Well, I mean, if I look at it economically, then of course the internalization of external cost would be the best solution. But then we would talk about an ETS price somewhere between 100 and 200 euros, because that's the damage that a ton of CO2 is causing on this planet. If you try to do that as a country or as a region, as a European region, you drive your industry out of the union. So it's not because the politicians are so stupid that they are not able to fix the ETS system. It's this conflict of interest. On the one hand, politicians who try to maintain the competitiveness of Europe. On the other hand, we all see the need to have a market-based instrument like the ETS system, because that is actually delivering the best solutions. So the fact is, right now we have a surplus of about 2 billion allowances. It's going to take a while to get them off the market. The market stability reserve that was just passed this year is a first step. but there needs to be a more fundamental reform. The heads of state already decided last year that in the future we're going to lower the cap each year 2.2%. But in my estimates, it's going to take somewhere between 5 or 10 years for the system to really work again. So the cap is there. And I'm trying to remind everybody about this cap, because 2.2% straight down means that around 2060 we're at 0 emissions in Europe. So under these conditions, I would not put my money into a lignite plant. But on the other hand, right now, we don't see efficient prices that, for example, would allow us not to support renewables. We need this mixture to only rely on the ETS system, and not having additional instruments would just maintain the current unsatisfactory situation. So we want to move on to renewables, and that's why we have these additional instruments. And that's also why we now introduce this additional instrument of taking 13% of the lignite off the market. We have to do that, because otherwise we're not going to meet our climate targets.
Lian, Norway has been one of the sort of first, in the forefront, we would say, in arguing against interventions in the market and leaving it to the emission trading market. Do you think we're able to find a balance? Because as you hear, it's not realistic to have a carbon price that is strong enough to internalize the cost and to drive change to where we're going. But on the other hand, we want markets to work.
No, I think really the ETS is more of a success politically than we like what we like to address today, because if you see the willingness to actually put in place a strong ETS back in the days, nobody anticipated the finance crisis and the challenges for European economies. There were a willingness within the membership countries and Norway back then to actually put in place a strong ETS. The problem probably was that you didn't make the system dynamic enough. So, but I think what we did, European countries went together and said, okay, we put in place an ETS, and we maintain 28 plus 3 different energy policies. And therefore I strongly believe it's easier for the market to work in an effective manner also in reducing CO2 emissions if you have not 31 different energy policies, but if we have one common climate policy, and probably not very easy to say that we have one energy policy in Western Europe or in Europe, but at least to develop more integrated markets. It's going to make it easier to also reduce CO2 emissions on the long run.
Bakke, you don't comment?
Well, first of all, I agree. We need this internal market because that is actually the best for all of us. But we also have to see that the 28 heads of states of the EU decided last October already that we need 3 targets for 2030. A climate target, a target on efficiency, and a target on renewables. And they also said very clearly, it's perfectly okay if some countries are front runners as long as we as the European Union reach these targets all together. So the German ambition in these negotiations were stronger. We wanted to have 40% greenhouse gas cuts, 30% renewables, 30% efficiency. The outcome was 40, 27, 27. In Europe, you always have to make compromises. But that's not the important point. The important point is we are all moving in the same direction, at a different speed, but in the same direction. And in Europe, at least in the EU, we have a consensus that we need targets for the 3 areas: greenhouse gas emissions, efficiency, and renewables. And only this mixture will allow us to develop the system efficiently.
Chope, if we look back for the last 10 years in the European power market, what would be different today if the markets were left alone, with only the power price and the emission price to determine where we go? Would we have wind and solar today without the interventions that, for instance, Germany has put in place?
I think without any doubt the renewable development that we have seen in the last period would not have been possible without Germany financing that. There was an interesting article in the New York Times some time ago closing with the remark, Germany has basically given this as a gift to the world, and luckily Germany can afford it. So not necessarily the simple truth, but there is something in that, of course. And I think that's a great element, of course. So the renewable development has only been possible with such type of stimulus instruments in the market. At the same time, I think it is always important to have a perspective, a vision that things should have to work then in the long run without such subsidies, and then also work on the mechanisms how technologies do compete with each other, find solutions for the problem that in a system with a high penetration of renewables, the energy-only market is not going to give you necessarily the right incentives to support the flexible element and all these kind of things. So we need to use markets going forward, and we also need to understand markets as being a dynamic element that we need to adjust to the system structure that we strive for.
Now, I think it's a bit of time ahead, but we must assume that the wind and solar will dominate the power production in our region in some years from now. Now, what kind of energy prices do you have in an energy market with zero marginal cost? What sets the price?
Well, in the moment when you have 100% wind or 100% solar, the price, of course, is going to be zero, or maybe even below. But these are going to be few hours of the year. I mean, if I look 10 years ahead, in Germany, we want to have reached a level of renewables of 40 to 45%. We're now at 30. 10 years from today, 40 to 45%. But that's the annual average. And since the scientists have found out that the sun doesn't shine at night, of course there has to be a much higher percentage during the day. Yeah? So if you consider an ordinary weather year, 10 years from today, we're going to have almost every week hours where we produce more electricity from renewables than we have demand in Germany. And that, I think, is very, very interesting, of course, for the internal market. And that's why I think that both of our countries are very smart to build an interconnector, a sea cable. Because in times when we have a lot of electricity and the price is going to be low, you guys can leave your water in the mountains and buy the electricity on the German market. And in other times, when we have very little sun and very little wind, prices are high, you can produce more than you need yourself and sell the other way. And the price at the wholesale market is always being determined by the last generator that is needed. That price everybody gets. And I don't know where that price is going to be. It's a question of how is this mixture going to develop. We can just make sure that this is going to work in the most efficient way, and therefore we need the markets. And therefore we also need the markets in the renewables. That's why we abolished now our feed-in tariffs, and we said we need also a competitive system when it comes to supporting renewables. And the market then, of course, if they don't need any additional support, then the auctioning is going to show a price of zero. But I don't personally expect that, because I think you're perfectly right. In a marginal cost market, to introduce two technologies with marginal cost close to zero is going to result at the end, at least at average low prices.
Liam?
Well, I think we've had a very good cooperation between both our friends in the UK and our friends in Germany on discussing these developments. And I think it really illustrates how we're in it together, and that cooperation and building huge markets is to a great benefit for everybody involved. For instance, Norway would have had to at least strengthen our capacity on transmission and probably also on production with at least 30% if we should try to be self-sufficient with power. Every part of the country, all year round. The alternative, of course, is not an option to say to parts of the country, okay, we'll be able to deliver power 300 days a year, obviously. But I think it's important to remember that the cost for delivering power in the system consists of production, transmission, and consumption. And where we have a very flexible production already in place, I think what I saw in the Zero Expo earlier today was the possibility to increase flexibility in consumption. And I think probably there are a lot of business opportunities for companies, but also for consumers in developing these systems. But I think you'll never be able to to move away from actually addressing the system as a whole with production, transmission, and consumption. But we have to be aware of the need for flexible production in our systems, but we could probably achieve more with flexibility on the consumption side.
Choppe, you were introduced, we heard earlier today that Statkraft is Europe's largest renewable energy producer, but you're also the largest owner of hydro reservoirs. And with the need for balancing we see coming up, isn't it sort of a waste of resources to spend parts of that hydro balancing capacity to cover base load needs in Norway? Shouldn't we integrate the markets much, much further? I mean, imagine that if it was one country. How would we do this together if Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway was one country?
I don't think actually that national borders are the problem here, to be honest. It's really about structural things. There is, unfortunately or fortunately, the North Sea in between, so we have to go through that. But connecting Norway and the storage to continental markets makes a lot of sense, and nobody, I think, is seriously doubting that. One storage here, Blåsjø, has the capacity of 200 times the entire capacity of Germany as a whole. So this is a very simple example that illustrates this. But of course we need to get the infrastructure in place for that, and the infrastructure needs to also follow a certain incentive scheme, and there we may have problems on the way that the incentive scheme does not stimulate enough interconnection. So that is an area that we need to think about more in the future. That's, in my view, not yet completely solved, although we have, luckily, the first investments in the pipeline. It makes a lot of sense.
Bakke, last question to you. You heard Tord Lien explain how successful Norway has been in introducing electric vehicles. Now, that's the second half of creating a low-carbon economy, is to convert the end use of fossil fuels into electricity from renewables. And actually, Germany is supplying the vehicles, but we are buying most of them. We are buying more than half of Volkswagen's electric vehicles. When will Germany start using your renewable electricity in the transport sector?
Well, to be very clear about this, I think in the long run we are all going to drive our private cars with electricity, because that's what decarbonization is going to result in. We have to look at what do we do at the right time. The situation in Norway is very different from the situation in Germany, because you have a 100% renewable power system. And if you drive your car with electricity, you save the oil that otherwise would be burned in the engine. In Germany, we are proud that we have already reached 30% renewables. We still have 15% nuclear and 55% lignite, coal, and gas. And if you compare the emissions that an electric vehicle has, because it's not the exhaust pipe of the car, it's the chimney of the coal generators, then the emissions caused by electric vehicle in Germany is about the same as a modern diesel. So driving an electric car in Germany makes a lot of sense, but not in terms of reducing CO2 emissions today. So of course this has to change, and over time, as we are moving towards 100% renewables, of course, then the advantage is going to come. But it's a question, what do you do at what time? We have about 60 million cars in Germany, and we have a target of 1 million electric vehicles by 2020. And I think once we have larger numbers of renewables in our power system, we're going to see an increase. And of course, it's also a question for the industry to now develop the technologies of tomorrow. And here, I can say congratulations. At this point, you are the leader in pushing the markets here by giving incentives for these electric vehicles to be sold.
But we also have 100% of the larger car ferries. But luckily, also that comes from Germany.
Yeah, that's only one yet. Yeah, well, I guess the German car industry has gotten an extra sort of kick to develop new technology after the Dieselgate in the United States, and we will see a lot of things change in the global car industry in the future. I think I've seen a very strong commitment to regional cooperation in creating an efficient and renewable power system in this region of Europe. So thanks a lot, Bakke, thanks Lien, and thanks Choppe for taking the time and discussing this with us.
Thank you.
Da dagens program ferdig, og alle hjertelig velkommen til et lite vorspiel I Zero Expo før middagen. Det vil bli en liten matbit der. Det har blitt stekt elg ute I hele dag, og det fortsatt elg igjen der ute. Så kan det få seg en liten matbit også før middagen. Jeg har lyst til å si tusen takk nå til alle våre samarbeidspartnere som har stilt opp her, og alle andre som gjør det mulig for oss å arrangere denne konferansen. Det fantastisk innsats som gjort, og takk også til Playroom for å få dette til å fungere så fantastisk som det har gjort I hele dag. Vi ses ute I teltet. Det blir gøy å se på alle løsningene som vi har snakket om I dag. Nå kan vi gå ut og kjenne litt på dem. Det blir litt vorspiel der, og så det middag inne på Folkets hus senere I kveld. Vi ses der, eller vi ses videre på dag 2 I morgen. Takk for I dag, alle sammen.